It's important as a Photoshop portrait retoucher and someone adding special effects to files to know what kind of file types there are in Photoshop and which ones are used in what context. So by the end of this lesson, you'll understand the various file types as well as modes. For example, saving a PSD file, a Photoshop file, keeps its layer so that you can edit it later, but it's a much larger file. Saving it as a JPEG is fine if you're uploading it to a web page, but it is compression technology, so you might lose a little bit of the quality if it's not saved the right way. Before we get into a quick overview of tools and techniques that we'll be using, I want to go over some file mode considerations when we're dealing with portrait photography. So you don't have to open up any photo with this. It's not really a follow along just yet, but you can if you want. You can open up any photo that you have, and if you just go up to image and then mode, and you'll notice there's a couple things here: RGB, CMYK, LAB. So these are different image modes, and Photoshop can edit and save in a variety of modes. RGB is traditionally meant for screen, so it's red, green, blue, 3 channels of light. And CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, key, or black, and that's traditionally meant for print. And then there's a couple other ones like lab, which the lightness is in the L channel and the A and B. We'll deal with some of that in the black and white conversion techniques. In the next lecture, I'll be going over the difference between 8-bit and 16-bit channel. So under RGB mode and a couple of the other modes, we can save this as a JPEG. So if I go to File, Save As, we have JPEG here, and JPEG is a compression technology, so it will compress the file, meaning we'll lose a little bit of image quality compared to just a PSD file or a RAW file. You lose a little bit of data. However, in favor of JPEGs is that it's smaller file size relative to PSD and RAW file. And a lot of times the JPEGs look just fine. If you're printing them out and there's a high resolution or they're on a web page, not a big deal. But if you save it as, I'll just save this as a new file here, photo 2, it comes up with this dialog here. Always keep it on 12 maximum. You'll have really noticeable loss of quality. If you bring it lower than that, you'll see some JPEG artifacting, kind of a blocky texture along some of the edges. And that's because these are raster files. These are not vector files, and it's a compression technology. So if I zoom in close enough, you'll see the actual pixels that we're dealing with. That's because these are all raster files. And eventually in JPEG compression, 2 pixels are close enough in hue and tone and saturation that they just become the same. And that's how JPEG artifacting can occur, is that you lose a little bit of image differentiation, a little bit of detail in there. In Photoshop, layers are very important, and another reason not to save in a JPEG is that you can't save any layer information. It will flatten the file and it'll just have one layer like here with the background layer. So if I go to File, Save As, and go up here, and instead of JPEG, the very top one, Photoshop.psd, that is the default Photoshop file format, and it can save information such as layer styles, layer adjustments, different effects that you've applied, and all the layering information. So if you have adjustment layers, you have layer styles, it's all in here. And we can edit it anytime we open the PSD file, as opposed to the JPEG, which only has one layer. Of course, PSDs are a lot larger files, and with PSDs, a lot of people will not be able to open them. You can't open them up in a lot of different editing programs or insert them into some word processing programs like you can with the JPEG. PSB, the large document format, right below Photoshop default file. The large document format is meant for files that are larger than 2 gigabytes, so that's a huge file. It's a huge photo file. PSD we cannot save larger than 2 gigabytes, so just use the large document format for those situations. BMP is short for bitmap. It is also raster one, very large files as well. GIF, CompuServe, or GIF, as some people say, it's from the old days of CompuServe, and I would not use this in portrait photography. You only have 256 available colors. You lose a lot of quality on the photo if you use a GIF. These are better for animated GIFs, or let's say a raster version of a logo, because it has limited number of colors. Usually logos don't have too many colors compared to photos. So I would not use the GIF for portrait photography files. Photoshop RAW is very useful when we want really high quality detailed images They are larger files, just like PSD. They're larger files. They're not a compression technology, meaning it's not going to do any preset compression. Digital SLR cameras shoot in RAW or JPEG. You can take a lot more photos with JPEG, obviously more quickly because it takes less time to write to the card compared to RAW because they're larger files. But Camera Raw has a lot more data to work with, so it doesn't have a preset white balance. It doesn't have a preset sharpness that it's applied, unlike the JPEG. And we'll go over some RAW techniques that you can do even on a JPEG file. Now, in Camera Raw, you can have 16-bit images. I'm going to cover that in the next lecture. So you have a lot more colors to work with compared to the 8-bit, and I'll use an example of why we would want to work in 16-bit. And then finally, PNG is meant to be an improvement to the GIF. It's one of the most popular online image formats. So if you're creating a web page, you'll often have JPEGs and PNGs on there. PNGs also have transparent capabilities like the GIF does, but it's a much better transparency, many shades of transparency, and it also has lossless compression. And then finally, we can save images as TIFFs as well. A lot of printers will accept these, and they don't retain all the information that PSDs do, but they do retain some of the information. I'm going to save it as just show you an example, a PNG. If I go to File, Save As, I'll just show you if I save it as, say, a GIF. All right, and it tells me, okay, 250 colors. If I try 257, it won't let me. See, we only have 256 possible colors. This is why if you have a logo and it's only 2 colors, and you could just, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, so I open up photo.gif, and there's photo.png. So I'm going to go to Window, Arrange, to up vertical, so you can see the difference here. So here's the GIF, and here is the PNG. So the PNG has a lot more colors available, obviously. See this banding here? That's because we only have 256 possible colors in the GIF. This is why we don't use GIF format in portrait photography, or any photography, really. So I have the JPEG open again. If I go to Image Mode, CMYK, and then go to File, Save As, you'll notice now I cannot save it as a PNG. Right? PNG is meant for the web, so RGB, 3 channels of light. It is not meant for print, CMYK. And there's a couple other ones we can't save it as under CMYK here. We can save it as PSD, of course, the default Photoshop file, but even GIF is not here, and either PNG and some of the other options. Only TIFF, RAW, PDF, JPEG, PSD, and we can save those as CMYK, but not the RGB. So if I go to Image Mode, RGB, and then Save As, and now we have a bunch of other ones like PNG and GIF and whatnot. So depending on your mode up here, it's going to affect what you can save your photo file as. If I go to Lab, for example, Save As, and we can only save it as a PSD, an EPS, a PDF, a RAW. We can't save it as a regular JPEG, a JPEG, or JPG. We can't save it as a PNG. The common file mode that we're going to be working in is the RGB, because it's meant for the screen. If a certain printer needs CMYK, that's fine. We can convert it to CMYK. And as far as the file formats, I highly suggest as you follow along in these tutorials, we're going to be using JPEG. And if you just want to save the flattened file, what it looks like, you can save it as a JPEG, go to Save As instead of Save, so you can save a copy as a JPEG. But if you want to hold on to your layering information, the layer styles, the adjustment layers, any effects that we've applied, and they're all in different layers, then be sure to save a copy also as PSD. That's kind of like our master file that we go back to and we can keep editing with. So PSD, RAW file for really high quality photos, and JPEG is fine a lot of the time, and PNG for the web. Now, if you want a really high quality photo, you would want to shoot in RAW and save it in RAW, and I'm going to cover next the difference between 8-bit and 16-bit images. I'm going to have a short little exercise that will show you why 16-bit is better to work in if you want a really high quality photo with a lot more colors.